I'll let Wes introduce himself first. A lot of you probably already know who I am. Been a big part of Sans for a few years, so I'll hand over to Wesley first, and we'll get going.
Hey everyone, my name is Wes Kuzma. I'm with Microsoft, specifically the Microsoft security team, and I spend a lot of my time out in the field with customers. So the presentation and ebook chapter Simon and I work through, based on a lot of what we see with customers, organizations across all sectors, both public and private. Really challenges that they struggle with, questions they ask, and solutions we've all come up with together. So happy to be speaking to everyone today or tonight.
Or tonight, yeah, it depends whereabouts you are in the world. So I'm coming from the UK. I actually work for Sans. I run part of the R&D element of Sans over in the European Union and the Middle East. And I work on very different projects within Sans, and I'm in a massive part of the Cloud Exchange program over the past couple of years, which I'm very appreciative of given the opportunity to do this, because it's a great opportunity to find out exactly what's happening in the world at the moment and get the perspective from industry experts like Wes. And again, the talks that we've just seen from Brandon and Paul, which were terrifying in their own right. But today and this afternoon, we're going to talk a little bit about zero trust. Now, one of the one of the thoughts processes that we had when we were putting this project together was, zero trust has been discussed and discussed and discussed. I mean, it's not a new technology, but it's being utilized in new ways. And organizations and the drive towards cloud is, it's fixed in our landscape now. It is happening at varying different rates. And a lot of the cloud platforms, in fact, all of the cloud platforms utilize zero trust as their underpinning for almost everything they do. The entire structure is based around identity. And so, regardless of whether or not you are pushing forwards in a zero trust model, if you're utilizing the cloud, you're already in it. This brings us with some interesting problems, and that is exactly what we're going to discuss today.
Yeah, so I always like a quick level set on the history of zero trust. I don't know about everyone on the call. However, zero trust really became a buzzword maybe 2013, 2014, 2015. It all gets a little foggy, but in my head, that's when vendors and security professionals and security experts really first started talking through zero trust. And it's not a new concept. Actually, Simon and I were just discussing the other morning. It even has roots in mathematical formulas. You can find zero trust in Bayesian inference. You can find zero trust in graph theory. There's the concept of zero trust goes way beyond just some kind of buzzword that vendors started putting in some of their cybersecurity products in the last decade or so. When it comes to, the formal definition of zero trust, we're talking about all the way back to the mid 1990s in the Jericho Forum. And really, at the essence, what we're trying to establish, it's not a technology or a tool. The second somebody starts saying, I have the next great zero trust solution, I have the next thing that will build zero trust in your enterprise, your organization, I actually start tuning out. There was a few years there when I personally stopped using the term zero trust altogether. I would use the term zero trust, and I could see security executives' eyes just dim and their heads sink a little bit, and it was not a fun experience. I'm trying to make it cool again. I know it's not just a me thing, it's not just a Simon thing. Others out there are preaching the gospel of zero trust again in 2025. And there have been some interesting evolutions in both the technology space, but also how we go ahead and secure our environments, the challenges, the culture of cybersecurity, the culture of IT, that makes it relevant more so today than potentially any time in the past.
Yeah, you're right with the culture as well. And zero trust had almost a negative connotation on elements of that culture for a little while. In fact, it probably still is, to be honest. I've been talking to numerous different clients over the past year, And there is still that hesitancy to even start or define that zero trust journey because it's like it's almost it's almost an abject fear about what could possibly come from it. But there's also an issue where, do the technologies support it? And I personally class almost everything that's, near enough a year old as being legacy technology. And things are moving so fast, especially with, the introduction of AI, the introduction of, well, we'll talk about vibe coding in a little while, but, all of these new things that are coming and that are changing the landscapes this principle of the zero trust element actually does seem a little legacy in itself. Except it's not because it's in your face. There's no avoiding it. It's gone from being a academic theory into something that's already in place and that is there to be utilized and to be maximized in order to protect against attacks against your organization. So there's a lot of things that are going on in this space. Not all of them are very clear cut. There's a huge amount of interpretation that doesn't necessarily define particularly well what those processes of what the process of implementation is. And as you said, was you mentioning it to security teams, and you either get abject fear or distaste across the faces of the people you're discussing. And we're here to kind of not just reinforce the fact that zero trust is, even if you don't call it that, if you deal with it as we are improving our identity services, great, it means you're going in the right direction. And a lot of what we're going to talk about today kind of sets out that benchmark and that standard. So
Yeah, and there's a couple high-profile things that have happened. 2017 onward, threat actors really started ramping up crypto ransomware attacks. We were seeing lots of credential theft, lots of identity compromise along the way. Things that the concept attacks, TTPs, that the concept of zero trust would really helps mitigate the blast radius, potentially proactively prevent the attack. We also go into 2020, COVID. Obviously, world-changing cultural shifts came out of COVID. How we work changes. Remote work is something that is more commonplace now than it was pre-COVID. There are impacts from that, sprawl of remote work that we can use zero trust principles to better control now. Geopolitical tensions. It's no secret the world is a more interesting place today. We have multiple conflicts around the world. We have, there are potential unstable government entities out there all around the world. How does this impact your enterprises? How does this impact the ability to protect and control and mitigate risk throughout your enterprise? ChatGPT. Simon and I could not do this presentation and not talk about artificial intelligence. So we're going to end strong and we're going to talk about zero trust and artificial intelligence. There's absolutely no escaping it. And just I think we'd be doing a disservice if we did not hit AI and zero trust before the end of this presentation. And really thinking about what's next. So let's kind of take one more second before we dive into the meat of the presentation and just talk through a quick definition of zero trust. Because as Simon mentioned, as I've mentioned, it looks a little bit differently depending on who you're talking to. Our stance, my personal stance, my team's stance at Microsoft, zero trust starts with a strong identity and access management foundation. Yes, there are layers of network segmentation. There are layers of XDR and EDR and visibility and data protection. And we can keep stacking a layer and layer and layer to really get to a zero trust posture. But at the end of the day, we're assuming breach. We're explicitly verifying activities and transactions that occur in your environment, and we're using least privilege at the core, and we could go off on probably a 20-page dictionary style definition of what zero trust is and what zero trust isn't. For the purposes of this presentation and in order to keep things simple and straightforward, those are really the principles that we're looking to enforce and that we want to talk about today. And we do that through the zero trust architecture. We do that through different technologies, different processes, even different roles in an organization. Simon, what did I miss on that one?
Oh, well, again, as you said, we could spend an entire day just talking about the elements and the component parts of zero trust and how they're implemented within an organization. I was just as you were talking there as well, I was just having a look at some of the comments that are coming through, and it's a real mix of people who are working in environments towards that sort of zero trust principle, and there are others who are this is just literally things to sell us and solutions that are out there. And I agree and disagree with all of these points. What I would like to say though is, zero trust isn't a destination. It's kind of like it's a journey. It's something that you implement as you go. It's takes into consideration almost all elements of of your entire enterprise organization. It's there to help your users. There was a comment a couple of minutes ago that said, this is unless your users are involved in the process, it's going to fail. And absolutely. And it's one of the things that actually we missed on this slide is, the people element of the processes and the technology behind it. This, zero trust is a mechanism to get to the point where nothing is implicitly trusted. You verify every connection and you benefit the end users by providing them with a tool set that's robust, that allows them to act like your human firewall, like the way you want them to act when it comes to good security posture. But it's very difficult because, this conversation has been muddied. It's been dirtied by a number of different vendors coming out over the years going, we have the ultimate zero trust solution. It's the same story again and again and again. I remember when VMware came out with virtual machining, and this was going to solve all of the security problems. Well, it does. It solved a lot at the time and then generated a whole load more. Well, we're in the same boat. Zero trust then fits around all of the models that we utilize in order to provide much better security and much better oversight, and it's happening regardless of whether you're involving yourself in it. And I think that's one of the major key parts to it. But
And the technology always changes. I mean, the technology we use today, 10 years ago, much of it did not exist. Some of it existed, but it was in kind of infant stages, or we were kind of, crawling or walking. We weren't running. Even if you look at the three big public cloud providers, the public cloud today looks very, very different than it did 10 years ago. Looks Public cloud was basically non-existent. No, it was non-existent 20 years ago. It takes a minute sometimes to catch up. The technology is always going to change. And you don't have to call it zero trust. Call it your super duper layered security strategy for all that matters. Call it we're going to authenticate and authorize everything in our environment strategy. But the concept and principles, our case, my personal belief, a lot of security folks that I interact with, those concepts and principles will go ahead and persist in the future. This will be relevant in 10 years from now. And if it's not, you can send myself and Simon emails saying, hey, you guys were wrong, and I will graciously admit we were wrong.
the good architecture guides from all of the cloud providers, Google, and the big three, Google, AWS, and Microsoft, are all based around the foundations of zero trust. And so it has to be included in everything that we do. But yes, there are elements of hesitation, but don't worry, we're going to work through those elements of hesitation. I'm going to explain how some of the emerging technologies are going to affect and are affecting our current approach to zero trust and cloud security as a whole.
Yep. And Emerging technologies actually tends to be an academic term. Whenever somebody starts talking about emerging technologies, I always go to, okay, what are the security journals talking about? What is SANS consider an emerging technology? I mean, a quick chat GPT or Google or Bing or whatever you use, you type in what are the current emerging technologies, and you will probably get a list that includes these technologies. So we do want to talk about a few of these today and kind of frame the zero trust conversation around these emerging technologies. Because emerging technology, it's what drives innovation, it's what drives new attack surfaces. Some of them are either responsible for or the result of cultural shifts. And it also is driving industry transformation. And again, I promise I'm not going to say AI every 5 minutes, but AI is the industry transformation emerging technology right now. We could have said cloud was the industry transforming emerging technology 10, 15 years ago. As I believe Paul or Brandon pointed out, cloud is pretty routine now, but still considered emerging technology for academic purposes. And the one other thing to consider when it comes to emerging technologies, sometimes it's not the technology itself that we have to protect. It goes back to the users and the people, to some of the points made in the previous presentation. Technology is great. How do we control the user behavior, which is often the harder component there?
I'm just looking at the five emerging technologies that we have on our on the screen. The one that was forced upon us 4 years ago was the remote work element. Because up until this point, I was been assured by numerous employers in the past that working remotely was impossible and that could never happen. And look where we are now. There's organizations who are desperately trying to get people to come back into the office in order to increase productivity. It's an issue that's happening in the UK at the moment and in various varying states across the US. But there are other technologies that have come about that haven't necessarily been forced upon us, but that we've kind of drifted and amalgamated into our technology stacks as well. The cloud obviously being the big one, because this is now underpinning a considerable amount of the workloads that we do through industries. But AI, the introduction of OT, which was effectively pushed forward by the reduction of human workload and introduction of the automated services and processes. And these are all supported by identity access management, by procedures, by policy, by the rule set, and supported by cryptography. Now, there's a lot of things in there that are not emerging, or I definitely wouldn't define as emerging. I mean, AI is changing on a daily basis. We've seen huge ramifications of small or what appear to be minor changes in the technology stacks and the way that people are using them, particularly in sort of our security. But it's the cultural shift that goes alongside it. And AI has definitely had the propensity to change that over the last couple of months. Just touching a year, maybe. I have a system on my phone that will answer the call for me and effectively shield me from cold callers, of, generally sales executives or people trying to sell me new phones, etc. And this is a fantastic technology that's been made available to the end users across the world. But then there's a flip side to that. There's also, the ability to change your voice and use AI to mimic others, which can be utilized in social media. Attacks can be utilized against your service desk, etc. So there's again massive change afoot here. The underpinning is, well, we are still trying to authenticate and authorize everybody and everything to every other system. And all of these emerging technologies change the dynamics of that process. So zero trust depends on the cloud services, or does the cloud service depend on zero trust?
It's both.
Uh, I,
So, the point we want to kind of get everyone to think about here is cloud is an attack surface. Your cloud implementations are an attack surface. That is probably not shocking. That is probably not news. I would hazard guess anyone that has a, somewhat mature cloud implementation is going to have a lot of different security tools, policies, procedures, personnel that are out there securing the cloud. The point that we want everyone to think about and consider, you're not getting to zero trust, though. You're not getting to implement some of those zero trust principles in the digital world without cloud services. Very few security vendors, very few modern practices are things you go spin up on big iron in a data center anymore. You are using a cloud service to secure your cloud services. You are using a cloud service potentially to secure your operational technology environments, to secure your on-prem data centers for those organizations that still have on-prem data centers, to secure devices, to secure laptops, windmills. Like, you pick your what you have to worry about in your business, and it's probably a cloud service that is securing it. It's probably SaaS based. There's a good chance it lives on AWS, it lives on GCP, or it lives on Azure, or it lives on some other vendor's private cloud implementation. So just thinking through, you know, the cloud as something you have to secure, but cloud is also the security provider. There's some interesting discussion points there.
What do you see as the sort of the main discussion point you have with your clients when it comes to, deciding or defining where they're going to provide their security services from?
Yeah. That security policy enforcement. And policy enforcement, I really mean the technical policy enforcement. There are a lot of different risk engines. There's a lot of different ways with automation, with IAC, even with AI, that we can go ahead and start enforcing zero trust policies across data, across apps, across infrastructure, across networking devices. Figuring out how to consolidate and aggregate that policy enforcement is kind of key here. And the really successful organizations, the organizations that have strong policy enforcement, they are doing that policy enforcement in a way across their various platforms in their environment, the various things they have to secure, and it's centralized. It's not, I need to go look at my windmill policy engine, and then I need to go look at my network policy engine, and then I need to go look at my cloud policy engine, etc. That fragmentation by itself creates risk. That creates blast radius. That creates potential gaps in policy coverage. So definitely, when we think about one of the benefits of cloud, if your thing you're trying to secure can reach those cloud endpoints, what are the advantages, or what are the disadvantages of centralizing that policy enforcement to get holistic coverage across your entire enterprise, no matter if it's a windmill or a desktop or a phone or another web application?
It's a drive towards that fabled single pane of glass that I've never actually come across. And I've worked in numerous security operations centers and advised on all of these integration services. It's hard, isn't it? It's all around. There are numerous different products out there. Organizations that never or very rarely exist in a single cloud platform. And not only that, they've got to be monitoring things that they've got on, in the real world as well, in physical locations, or in remote services, as you mentioned, things like windmills. We've had recent incidents in the European Union where we've had attacks against hydroelectric services and power plants, and all of these systems are connected to the internet, and therefore they can be effectively connected to the cloud and effectively controlled through there. But how you go about that, and how, where you make the decisions on the technologies that you're going to use, is very much dependent on your business, your objectives, and the kind of technology you want to adopt. I remember distinctly working with an organization once who had a management system in a cloud platform. And as we're going through all of the things that they had connected to this service and what they were potentially exposed to on the external side, or on the outside of their services, and what we were going to have to do to be able to monitor those. And I remember one of their security consultants telling me that no, everything's self-contained. It's either here in this data center or here and everything. And then about 2 hours later, we stumbled across a bit of technology they were using that they neglected to mention. It turned out they had like over 4,000 different sort of OT connected objects in the field. And they're like, oh yeah, they are IP. It's like, okay, so we've now increased dramatically the landscape of what we're dealing with. It's all down to identity and policy, and how we implement those identities and policies varies massively on what it is that we're trying to protect. Now, primarily, we're really talking about sort of, confidentiality and integrity here. But there is another element to this as well, which is the availability side. And again, this is, how zero trust can affect availability and how we can utilize that to our advantage to become more resilient. Geopolitical tensions, particularly around Europe at the moment, are getting quite tense. And we have had several instances where undersea communication cables have been cut, where certain countries or political decisions have made routing in those countries difficult or almost impossible. And the cloud, has the ability to grow and expand beyond what you would have on your on-prem site. And so organizations have to use this to their advantage, but they've got to use it in an appropriate way.
And this map is a map of Microsoft data centers all across the world. I can today go spin up VMs in Singapore. I can go spin up VMs in the UK, and I can go spin up VMs in the Western United States in about 5 minutes. Anyone on this call can go do that. You can do it across multiple cloud services. You could spin up regional VMs in every one of our cloud services with probably very little effort on your part. It's no longer building a data center is a 2-year process, 3-year process. We're worried about electrical, we're worried about hardware, we're worried about wiring everything up, etc. I've racked and stacked stuff in my career before cloud was a thing before, and it's a lot of fun. Kind of miss it personally. However, that's not the world we live in today. If your zero trust capabilities depend on potentially globally distributed tools, understanding how those tools are distributed, understanding, well, if a threat actor goes ahead and knocks down Europe as a region, what does that look like? What does the threat model look like there? If my European data center goes offline, I centralized all of my cyber monitoring for my wind. I don't know why I keep using windmills. That wasn't planned, by the way. I centralized all my cyber monitoring for my windmills in Europe, and now it's a big black spot. I have no idea who's logging in. I have no idea how they're logging in. I have no idea if my phishing resistant multi-factor authentication is working across my windmill farm. We always think about the very poor tenet of availability, but the cloud does make availability easy in some ways, but it makes the planning and the brain power that has to go into maintaining availability a bit more difficult. Every single service you have has to run somewhere. There is a physical location for your cloud services. Understanding where those cloud services are actually running in the world, understanding the redundancy and resilience of the cloud services themselves that may be helping you enforce zero trust. It's an activity that not a, I mentioned I work in the field, I work with customers. I haven't seen a lot of customers put a lot of brain power and effort into, and absolutely could be a gap. If we think about preventing, the opposite of resilience is fragility. If we think about preventing fragility, if we think about making things more resilient, it's really hard to say that with a straight face if we're having a conversation. I say, so what happens when your West Coast data cloud presence goes down? I have no idea. I think my cloud provider takes care of that for me. And maybe part of the shared responsibility is the cloud provider does take care of some of that for you. But understanding the ramifications and the impact of regional outages, geo-regional outages for large distributed applications, global companies, absolutely critical.
It's a difficult challenge to solve, to be honest, and it's one that I'm actually working through at the moment. So my primary cloud specialism is architecture and engineering. That's where I sit. I'm currently developing or founding a new company that is creating a new product that's going to help people deal with things like break glass and root account controls. One of the things I have to do is maintain a very high availability. And so I've devised an infrastructure that's spread across AWS, GCP, and Azure. And the reason being is at some point in my time, I've been bitten by an outage on all three cloud providers because these things happen. There are certain elements that are outside of your control. And organizations don't necessarily always think about this as a priority. It's a challenge of availability. It's a challenge of preparing and planning for those availabilities and for business continuity, disaster recovery solutions. Well, they rely on you to be, evenly spread, not just regionally, but potentially between cloud providers as well. We see this as, very common oversight. I am absolutely attuned to not getting that part wrong in this new business venture, and we've designed a solution specifically to tackle this particular problem. But it doesn't just affect the systems that are operating as well, doesn't availability. Availability also covers into things like the working from home that we mentioned earlier. And one of the technologies that supported working from home and been in the underpinning of all remote connectivity over the years has been VPN. Now, VPN's not entirely had its day, but it's definitely getting long in the tooth.
Yeah, I mean, VPN was the solution. I need to enable my remote workforce. All right, give them a VPN. They get a little VPN client. They have that nice site-to-site tunnel set up, and you've suddenly got secure communication between your workers and your on-prem infrastructure. Part of the problem, though, and why it's kind of counter the principles of zero trust, it gives those workers generally access to the entire on-prem infrastructure. So an observation, large organizations don't do a great job at segmentation. I mean, that might be shocking to folks out there, but there's definitely a trend in the industry that if somebody gets on your enterprise network, they have access to a lot of your enterprise network. It's not just they have access to this little least privileged bubble of applications that they need. They have access to your entire breadth of applications. They have access to potentially sensitive data stores, etc. Um, Segmentation is absolutely a key piece of zero trust. So when we think about, okay, am I going to spend a lot of time really micro segmenting my on-prem environment and still maintain VPNs? Or am I going to look at newer technologies? Let me think about emerging technologies that could go ahead and support the principles of zero trust with and do things differently, quite frankly, because that's part of the if we think about zero trust in 2025, that's part of the evolution. What can I do differently now because of technological improvements that I could not do in 2015, that I could not do in 2005? Um, so you end up getting a whole host of new technologies that really allow you to pinhole into your environment and only expose the applications that that user needs, thus enforcing principles of zero trust, thus enforcing the basic concept of least privilege. I mean, Simon, you want to hit the private access piece?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and the whole kind of story around VPN, as you rightly said, it was the solution at the time. Well, the times have moved on. We've got whole new capabilities now, but we're still pulling a whole lot of legacy baggage with us as well. We've got to take things kicking and screaming and bring them into the sort of 2025s. Um, VPN was a fantastic solution because it meant your basically you were bringing your end users inside your environment. Now we don't want to do that. Now the environments are protected by a zero trust structure, so we need to accommodate for that and utilize it at our advantage because it's been provisioned and put in place for us. And when we can do that by utilizing things like the private access services that were, I think, just into general availability around this time last year when we were doing the 2024 Cloud Security Exchange. Well, it's here and it's implemented and it works. I've got a nice little lab set up with almost exactly this inside my own environments at the moment, and I'm starting to now introduce a lot of the legacy infrastructure as well. So services that are not cloud based but can be created and dragged into the cloud and authentication environment. Therefore, we can include them as part of the zero trust model.
Yep. No, that pinholing capability and the ability to enforce your policies on the access of the applications. Someone logging in from a risky geo, nope, we're going to block that with a policy. It automatically happens. We don't have to have an alert to the, oh, we could alert the SOC, but we don't have to have an alert to the SOC as part of that mitigation. Being able to enforce things like your device is compliant, only corporate devices, only managed devices. Your device has up-to-date antivirus definitions. Your device has certain configurations on it. The evolution in some of these remote productivity technologies just absolutely blows VPNs out of the water. So whenever highly encourage as folks are planning, am I refreshing my VPN? Do I need more hardware? What does that look like in 2025, 2026, 2027? Start looking at some of these private access technologies if you're not already, and multiple vendors offer these type of technologies.
It really extends that whole sort of conditional policy. Well, you can now go, okay, so we have a user who's using a device, and on that device, they're using a particular browser and they've authenticated. So we're going to grant them this level of access. We can manage their session. We can determine when that session ends. And if they change the browser that they're using, we can apply a different policy. We can alter the structure of the way that the access is granted at application level, not just at user or device or location level. That is the big shift inside these capabilities. And not only that, we can integrate those into multiple cloud services and environments as well. So again, we get that much better oversight, much clearer view of the things that are happening within our environment. Now, I was teaching a class a couple of weeks ago, and one of the questions came up was, zero trust and packet capture. These are two things that don't necessarily live together in the same space, because if you're packet capturing an infrastructure that's designed specifically around zero trust, then you've got to have the keys that have been signed, those packets, in order to be able to decode them, etc. The point that I made at the time was, well, to be honest, zero trust gives you a much better insight into what's happening on your networks and your identity, because you can now trace everything from the initial authentication and every token and authorization that happens as part of that authentication flow and that pipeline, from user to application, from application to backend service, and from backend service to database. You shouldn't need to rely on the packet capture capabilities there anymore. They're there as a benefit and they will reinforce the information you're picking, but the traditional blind spots, as I'll say, and I might get a couple of cloud advocates who get a bit cross with me about that one, but the blind spot in the cloud has always been that sort of network layer of visibility, which is actually, funnily enough, something else that Microsoft have actually brought back into general, or bringing into general availability very soon, which is a tool called Microsoft Tap. We're not going to go into that though in this session. We'll save that for another one.
Ooh, so
Oh,
let's
I
jump.
think we.
Sorry, went too far there. So if we jump over to cryptography real quick, I think we really wanted to highlight quantum cryptography, post-quantum cryptography. It is here. They exist. There are lots of people, probably way smarter than myself, probably smarter than Simon too, working on these solutions right now. There are attacks that threaten current cryptography. Are the attacks relevant to every organization right now today? Shor's algorithm, the Grover algorithm, those would be two of the algorithms that threaten current cryptography. If post-quantum cryptography is not on your radar, it should be. Attacks against current cryptography schemes that are successful against the things that underpin the entire darn internet and probably every service we rely on, 5 to 15 years. Those attacks really could be here. And that was not a number I made up. That was pulled from some industry research. And in the interest of time, because Simon and I do like to talk, I think we'll flash this up and then end on AI. Does that sound about right, Simon?
That sounds about right. I
Yep.
will just add a couple of little elements though to the cryptography
Yep.
issue. Now, it was about a year ago I actually got asked by a potential student if SANS had a post-quantum cryptography course in the makings. As it stands at the moment, I still don't think that's a journey we're about to take, but the journey has already begun. Um, everything that we do inside authentication, authorization is handled by cryptography and elements of cryptography. Everything you do in mobile communication, online banking, social media services, etc., it all relies on that cryptography. And unfortunately, over the past 15 years, we've had numerous different breaches of data sets, some of which have been encrypted. Unfortunately, the attackers like to play the long game and they will be sitting on that data until quantum cryptography comes along and destroys our current cryptography standards. And it is between 5 and 15 years. There's been some interesting stories that come out in the press recently about how fast cryptography can be used. I think somebody attacked a 16-bit RSA key and broke that with some current quantum technology. Well, we're still a long way off breaking the current standards, but it is on its way. It's knocking at the door. And we do have to be aware that when that happens, there's going to be a lot of previously stolen data that was secure become very insecure.
Yep. And
And
this is
so
just an example journey. Screenshot it, snip it, download presentation materials after this. Start thinking about in your own organizations, what does post-quantum look like? Or is your organization currently on this journey? Do you need to start the journey? Do folks need to start discussing the journey?
it definitely should be on the table.
Mhm.
But what is on the table right now is
Ah.
AI. See, we're going to fit it in the end anyway. An AI and the zero trust mechanisms do sort of go together hand in hand. We utilizing even if it's your end users utilizing AI services, they zero trust should be part of that model in order to give you the controls over what they're doing. DLP solutions definitely have not yet managed to reach out into the space of AI tooling, AI prompts, etc., and the advisory services, but they are getting there. So we are limited to utilizing the tools that we have at our disposal, things like the principles of least privilege, assumed breach, and verify. Wes, go for
Yeah.
it.
I'll toss this up real quick. So the foundation of AI security involves two things, and enforcing zero trust across AI involves two concepts that nobody wants to do in their organization. They're two painful, tedious, underfunded concepts: identity access management and data governance. If I could get a room of 100 cybersecurity professionals and we ask what the two least fun topics we can discuss are, most likely a lot of people are going to toss out either identity and access management or data governance. So if we want to start thinking about having a zero trust conversation seriously in your organization when it comes to AI security, I fully encourage everyone on the call to explore those two topics, understand how you enforce identity and access management in your organization, how you govern data in your organization. And those are two topics that we could spend 8 hours just talking about each one of those topics. So a lot of big topics. We do go deeper into many of these topics in our ebook chapter we wrote. So happy to answer questions. Can't wait for the panel discussion later today. Simon, did you have any other closing thoughts? Because I think we're out of time.
We are just about out of time, but yeah, just to wrap it up, we've mentioned zero trust a lot. We've mentioned the principles of least privilege on a numerous occasions, and we even delved into a very brief look into the into where how AI works with that. When I'm teaching the classes, it's almost one of those terms that comes out at least 20 times a day on all 5 days, no matter what class I'm teaching. But it is important, and it is defined by the good architecture practices. And it is getting more important that organizations understand this, and that the evolving technologies that are being made available are included in those principles and those frameworks. Because if not, you are effectively bypassing the controls with a tool that has incredible capability now and is only going to improve and get better and more powerful in the coming years, the coming months and coming years. So having a full understanding of what this means to your organization, how it affects your zero trust model, regardless of whether or not you're proactively implementing it, it's there. You do have to deal with it.
Just want to say thank you, everybody. This was a pleasure and an honor.
We will be available for questions and answers afterwards as well in the Slack. Thanks very much for listening, and thanks, Wes, for all of your hard work putting this one together.
Thanks, Simon.